It's top of the hour. We've got 66 people waiting. I'm going to let them in.
Wow, great.
Let's cross our fingers that they're not
Open the
all
door
on video right away.
Let them in.
All right. Hello, hello. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Let's see.
Can't see you. Hello.
Hi.
Hey.
Hello. April, that you? I can hear your voice.
It is.
I can tell your voice.
Oh. I know.
I have to say, I'm proud to say there's 2 or 3 people here I don't recognize.
Want to put your face up? Welcome, newcomers.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to mute everyone. Thanks for your patience here. We'll get started in just a minute or so. We've still got people in the waiting room. People are still filing into the auditorium. If you can hear me, would you give me a thumbs up? Okay, great. And Stevie, I've unmuted you. Can you test your audio?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can. Chuck?
Testing, 1, 2.
All right. We've got audio. We've got people still filing in. Looks like we're going to have a full house tonight.
Great.
Or full house today, wherever you may be, time-wise right now.
Daniel, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Dan Strickland. I'm here in San Francisco. I manage a music venue here in the city, and have gotten to know Chuck pretty well recently, and really excited about the new album. This is really not about me, Chuck. It's about you and Stevie. But we are here to talk about the new book, What Makes the Monkey Dance? The Life and Music of Chuck Prophet and Green on Red. And some of you already submitted questions, but I want to encourage everyone to, if you have a question for Chuck that you haven't already submitted in your RSVP, to put it there in the chat box on the side, and we'll try to get to that. The time's gonna go by pretty quickly, but thank you everyone for coming. And without further ado, let's start, guys. Just a quick AV check. What are you seeing right now, Chuck?
I'm seeing a screen full of people, a lot of squares. I mean, like 25 squares. Looks like the Brady Bunch, except bigger.
All right, cool. Stevie, what are you seeing?
Well, my max is out at like 9 boxes, so I can see you, me, and Chuck, and 6 other people, friendly faces there.
Nice. Well, we've got 93 people in the room right now.
Whoa.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming again. So we're talking about what makes the monkey dance, and also thanks for pre-ordering the book or the record or bundle or however you got an RSVP for this. We appreciate that. Stevie, I want to start with you as the author of this book. When did you first hear Chuck's music, and how did that end up being the desire to write a biography?
Okay, well, it was a long gap in between, but I first discovered Chuck's music via Green on Red. So Green on Red were, as probably a lot of people here know, were signed to UK labels for the majority of their time. And so they toured a lot in Europe. And I remember reading a review in, I think it was Sounds magazine. So we had these weekly music newspapers, and it was Here Come the Snakes. So it must be 1988. And there was a line in this review in Sounds that talked about the album as a synthesizing country rock and blues into a syncopated drooling robot. And I thought, that sounds like my kind of music. So I bought the album, and that kind of kicked things off. So and then I Brother Aldo came out in 1990, I think it was, and I didn't even know that was coming. I was sort of browsing through the racks and came across this, and that's where it started. Then Chuck toured solo or with his band The Creatures of Habit, first time 93, and I caught the band in Edinburgh on that tour, and it started from there. And yeah, so that's where the journey began. And the first time Chuck and I were in contact then was, I wrote a review of a show he did in London in 97. So that would have been Homemade Blood era. And I wrote this review. I sent it to Henning, who ran Chuck's website, early days of the internet and bands' websites. And Henning liked the review, so he put it up. And then a couple of days later, Chuck emailed me and said, thanks for the review. And then it kind of started from there. So we would email back and forth. And then we would hang out after a show and chat. We'd have dinner before a show. And we just got to be friends, I guess. And that's, yeah, how it all started, really. That would have been early noughties, when we started to get to know each other a bit better.
When did you pitch Chuck on the idea of writing a biography?
I was checking back through my notes on this, actually, and I think it was around Night Surfer. So I think it was around 2015. And it took Chuck a little while to get on board. Would that be fair to say, Chuck?
Oh, I hated the idea. Yeah.
Yeah, talk about that, Chuck. I mean, so you've known Stevie at this point for a few years, and he says he wants to write a biography of you. I mean,
well, I mean, I knew that if it was going to be good, that I'd have to betray some people, and I knew that if we were going to get into the Green on Red years, that we were all going to contradict each other. And, you know, it's a big tangled mess. And quite frankly, there's some people that I'm waiting for them to die before I, give it all up. But, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, it made me uneasy. Just like a box set makes me uneasy. You make a bunch of records, they put it in a box, and somebody gets it for Christmas, and they put it up on the shelf like a Duke Ellington box set or something. And that's it, and I just don't really feel that that's where I'm at. I feel alive today. I feel excited about what I'm doing. I think I'm doing my best work. I might be delusional, but who cares, So I'm definitely in the moment, and going back through a lot of that stuff just didn't really seem like much fun, to be honest.
Is that how you feel? That's how you felt at the beginning, and you don't feel that way now about the book?
Well, I did feel that way, and I'm still conflicted. I mean, the book is, look, it's not all flattering. It's it can't be. I kind of, after Stevie pitched it, I just kind of let it lay there for a while, and I actually went fishing with a friend of mine, Mark Kozlik, and we were fishing, and we ran out of stuff to talk about, and one thing led to another, and I kind of mentioned this. Mentioned that this was kind of on the table, and Mark said, he said, "Let me ask you a question." He said, "This guy, is he like married?" I said, "Oh yeah, he's married." He says, "Does he have like a family?" Or I said, "Oh yeah, he's got kids. I met his kids." He says, "Well, he'll probably be all right." He says, "You got to look out for those lone wolf guys. That's my experience. They got nothing to lose, So I didn't know what that meant, but it kind of nudged me into it. And of course I enjoy Stevie's company, so it was never a chore. I mean, I don't mean that at all. And I trust him, and I like him. So yeah, so we got into it, and it took some doing.
Stevie, you spent 4 years working on this book, and there was, I imagine, you're across the Atlantic from each other, so there's personal visits, but also a lot of. How long did it feel like it took you to kind of get in the rhythm of actually starting to get the good stuff out of Chuck?
Yeah, well, it's I would say I have a day job, so it's not been my only thing for 4 years, but it's taken a lot of time. I think really when Chuck got on board, I found that and he cleared his diary for me. So, I mean, there's a big ocean in between us, and that's a little bit inconvenient. But I've had 4 trips, and each time I've been there about 5 days. So Chuck just, as much as he can, clears his diary, and we just sit and talk. And the first time, I think from the first time we sat down in his office space, and I switched on the recorders, and we just started to talk. It just seemed very comfortable. And my problem was, in the end, so much material, so many interviews. And it wasn't just Chuck. I talked to Steffi. I've talked to James DePrato, long chats with Kurt Lipschutz. Who else have I talked to? Eric Westfall, Paul Caldery, Kevin T. White. Loads of people have all kind of chipped in on this over the years. But, the heart of the book is really those interviews with Chuck. And we've had, I say, 4 visits. And each time we kind of revisited territory and I guess more and more has come out. And it's always been a huge pleasure and a privilege, to spend that time with Chuck and talk. And then the challenge really was getting it down to a length that the publisher's prepared to put into print. So yeah.
I want to bring in some. I'm getting a lot of great questions in the chat, guys. Thanks for sending those. And we're at max capacity right now, so you're part of a sellout Zoom show. I got a question from Pete Chapman.
I love sellouts.
I know we all love sellouts, don't we?
I feel like I'm at the railway in Winchester.
We got a question from Pete Chapman. He submitted this earlier. Has working on the book, Chuck, has it changed your perspective on any periods of your life?
Well, yeah, I mean, so much of so much of my younger days, I mean, when I'm forced to revisit it, I really do a lot of wincing, on so many levels. And there's ex-girlfriends and stuff, and maybe I wasn't always, we weren't all particularly nice to each other. And so I look back at a lot of that stuff, and a lot of foolishness and everything. But I think it's just natural, really. I mean, if you don't do that, how are you going to grow, And believe me, I'm not in the growing business. I've perpetually been, sustained this kind of adolescent lifestyle, right? Well into my adulthood. And I have nieces and nephews, and they're like, hey, man, how come you guys don't have kids? And why don't you ever do anything else? And, I'm like, I don't know. So, yeah, there's a lot in there.
Is there anything that comes to mind that was particularly surprising for you, being asked the question, something you'd forgotten?
Too many things to mention. I think the things that were fun for me was that I always said, Stevie, you're welcome to come, but there are some things going on here. And so there were a few times when Stevie was forced to jump into the van, and do a gig in Santa Cruz. And, it's a grind, I mean, when you're coming home from Santa Cruz at 3 or 4 in the morning, it's a real grind. So he got to see what it's like, some of the nicer gigs. And then he got to see a gig like the Crepe Place in Santa Cruz. There's no backstage. There's no dressing room. I don't even think there's a stage. And
there isn't. Yeah.
So we just kind of play in the corner, they move like a fern out of the way. But I love the promoter. And so Stevie got to see a lot of things. It wasn't all just, talk,
There's an interesting question here from Tad's iPhone. I assume there's a Tad attached to that. Chuck, please tell us a Jim Dickinson story you haven't told before.
Ooh.
Well, sometimes I think about, now that I produce from time to time, I do remember we were working on Here Come the Snakes, working on a song called Misty Morning Blue, which I just really love. And I was overdubbing a guitar part, and I just didn't really have anything to say. I hadn't been able to circle my prey and zero in on anything. And he he jumped up and he stomped around and he said, "Just play something fucking cohesive," you know, and left the room and slammed the door, you know. And so I remember that, you know. I think about like when I'm producing, you know, it's like, try to be gentle, Chuck. You know? I don't know that helps. But that word follows us around. I think both Dan Stewart and I use it all the time, you know.
Stevie, back to you. What do you think makes this different from standard rock biographies?
Okay, well,
the subject.
What's that? What was that, Chuck?
The subject.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I've been thinking about this. One of the things that interested me talking to Chuck, and I guess one of the things that I found was a revelation to me while we were talking, was just how hard a job it can be. So particularly, you know, certain periods where Chuck struggled, you think, you know, well, you just write some songs, you go in the studio, record them, and you release it, and you know. But actually, when you get into the nitty gritty, there's so much hard graft that goes into the process of making a great album. And I think so that was interesting to me. And I think part of what I try and do with the book is, you know, Chuck's been doing this for like 35 years or more, and the changes in the music industry over that time have been, you know, so we saw the rise of the CD, and then the CD collapse. We saw the rise of, you know, the MP3, and then streaming and vinyl coming back in. There's been all kinds, and that's just on the surface. There's all kinds of changes that Chuck, as a working musician, has had to negotiate while still, you know, trying to make the albums, get out and tour them, and just do, you know, the daily grind. So I think what I try and do with the book, as I say, is put, you know, Chuck's career into context and try and understand some of those struggles and triumphs in a wider frame of reference and what's going on in the music industry. And it's, you know, it's not like writing a Dylan biography or a Springsteen biography or whatever. You know, Chuck's been at the coalface, you know, making this work. You know, he doesn't get into an air-conditioned limo. Well, I didn't anyway when I did those shows and got in the van. You know, it isn't hotels and limos and Learjets. It's a different kind of lifestyle. And I don't think there's maybe, you know, people don't write about that kind of musician's life. And maybe there's something in there for people to get a clear understanding, hopefully, of what it's like to live a life like that, maybe.
Chuck, you kind of hinted at that before when you talked about, I guess, your nieces and nephews asking you, you know, why aren't you doing this or that? You know, how's your life? This is kind of the elephant in the room, but how's your life, your process, your work been affected by the pandemic?
Ultimately, not much. I mean, musicians are homebodies by nature. I'm listening to a lot of records. I'm playing guitar in my pajamas, you know, drinking coffee. That's pretty much what I do. You know, that's a good day for me, but I am anxious, and, you know, the anxiety of you know, I'm okay today, I'm going to be okay tomorrow, even the next day. But when I start to look at the big picture, I get anxious, and I do have some anxiety around that. If you guys could see my neighborhood here in San Francisco, you'd see a bunch of shops that are all boarded up, and I wonder what's going to happen. I mean, are they going to remain boarded up, yet there'll still be a Starbucks on every corner? Because a lot of these small businesses and the promoters that I work with, I see some of them here, you know, they're not connected to a larger corporate entity, you know. I mean, some of these American promoters, like the Bonnaroo Festival, and, you know, they've got investors from Saudi Arabia. You know, people don't really realize that. They're gonna land on their feet. They're like the airlines, you know. Oh God, the poor airlines, you know. But so many small promoters, I wonder if they will land on their feet, and I wonder what it's going to look like when we get through this tunnel. And I have to hope that we will get through this tunnel with a cure or whatever. But yeah, that's what it's like for me. I mean, fairly normal, except for that, that kind of anxiety I'm carrying around.
Well, I mean, your album was going to come out a couple weeks ago, and now it's happening in August. There have been a lot. Let's just get these out of the way. There've been a lot of questions about, favorite venues and where you're going to play and the status of your tour. Is there any sort of blanket statement you just want to get out there so people know? Kind of. I mean, we don't know, right?
I don't think people understand, going out, like making a record for me, wrestling that monster to the ground and making it do what I want it to do is it's not getting any. I'm trying to find easier ways to do it, but it just takes what it takes. And for me, I can't speak for my other bandmates, but getting in that van and going from town to town and setting up and playing and breaking down, I love it. Even when it sucks, I love it. And so I miss it. I see people here that I recognize at shows, and I miss bantering at the merch table. Really all the little mundane stuff I miss. And so, yeah, I mean, I really want to get back out there, and, we want it to be safe and all that stuff. But I mean, I don't think the experts are going to agree. I could tell you, I got 2 experts in my household, me and Stephanie, and we haven't agreed on much.
Let's little detour. I'm glad you mentioned Stephanie. I got a quick question for Stevie though, because you also alluded to Chuck being, seeing his process and seeing him when he's out on the road. Did that resonate with you? What Chuck was just saying about enjoying that interaction with fans and having those conversations, and did you see some of that when you were traveling?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I see it all the time when I catch Chuck on tour in the UK, and yeah, there's always that, there's banter around the merch table, and there's it's always great, when Steffi gets up and does a song, everybody loves it, and you do see, you see the familiar faces, and so there's a long-standing, fan base out here that turns out. And then I mentioned my day job. I'm a college professor, so I've occasionally brought a few students down to the Railway Inn in Winchester, and they're up at the front, and so we get a few younger faces in there as well. But yeah, I mean, definitely I think when the level Chuck tours, there's a kind of personal connection with the audience and that community of fans that you don't really get else, as you move up the venue scale and that kind of thing. And I think that's really precious, and I know how much Chuck values that. We've talked a lot about that, and and that's it's a beautiful thing to see. Yeah,
and 100 people in a Zoom room is not quite a substitute for that. Can't be.
I miss the physical nature of it, for sure. There's no getting around it.
This is going to sound really strange to you guys, and I don't know that I can pull it off, but it says that I think I miscalculated the time, so we've actually got 10 minutes left, and I want to get to a lot more of these questions. So here's what I'm going to try to do, if everyone can understand me. We're going to let this meeting expire, and then I'm going to reopen the Zoom with the exact same link and password and information that you already have. Then we're going to try to jump back into the call with the same information. Does that make sense to everyone?
Well, what makes sense to me is that if somebody doesn't come back, I'm going to get my fucking feelings hurt.
Because we are at 100 people, and
talking to you, April.
So let me. I can't see everyone's faces, but can I get some? Now I can see everyone's face. Can I get some thumbs up just to indicate that you understand what we're doing here? So we're going to end the call, but then great, we're going to get back onto it with the same ID, meeting, link, all that stuff. We'll see if it works, and if it doesn't, we'll just have to do another one, Chuck.
I got time.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
I want to talk about Stephanie, because I think there's sort of two things, switching gears now, talking about the new record. Steffi seems like she's more prominent on the record, certainly vocally, like on Marathon, which is a duet. But then there's also, I think, a vein of strong women in the content, in the lyrics too. So Chuck, you want to talk a little about that? I'm thinking, about womankind and waving goodbye and.
Well, I think that this is the time for women in many ways. I mean, honestly, there may have been a time when the world was like a Bon Jovi song, and if you could lift heavy shit down at the dock or something, you could go home and say, where's dinner? But it's kind of over for men because they got forklifts to lift heavy stuff, and women are more educated. They're better managers. They're better collaborators, and I just got to thinking about that. No offense to men. I mean, we really did have a pretty good run. But I think that comes up on the record between Womankind and Waving Goodbye. And also, honestly, I think it relates to the passing of Tom Petty. Because when Tom Petty passed away, there was so much Tom Petty music in the air everywhere I went. And, I remember driving down Highway 5 with Stephanie, and American Girl was on the radio, and I looked over and she was crying, So it's like I realized that he had an intelligence for writing for women, and, not only in a way that if you're a woman and you hear that song, you become the person in the song, so I have a heightened awareness of that, and I hope some of it got into this record, but I don't put myself next to anybody like Petty.
Well, some of us might disagree with that, but I think the other side of that coin, Chuck, is you're also right about there's songs about sort of the failure of leadership by men, in Nixonland and Get Off the Stage. It feels like two sides of the same idea, maybe.
Probably. I mean, maybe, I guess, Richard Nixon was a presence in my childhood, and he's the gift that keeps on giving. I don't know if anybody would even know Hunter S. Thompson's name if it wasn't for Nixon. I mean, and quite frankly, I think most of us here, I can't speak for my friends on the Angry Island, but most of us here would probably take Nixon back in a heartbeat. So great fodder for a song. It could have been many. We could have, it's probably got 4 verses, and we could have easily written 20 verses and still it wouldn't have gotten boring. And as for, the more contemporary song on the record called Get Off the Stage, I resisted that. I have to credit Kurt Lipschutz with bringing that title in and hammering me on it, and I just couldn't see it. I didn't really want to write a Trump song per se, but I know we found a way into it, and we kicked it around probably for a long time. Eventually I made it behave, and I don't even think Kurt and I really agreed on it in the end. But I started playing it solo on a solo tour, and it really worked, and I got excited about it. So yeah, Nixon Land, and there's a third presidential song on the record about Lincoln, and so yeah, a lot of presidents.
Well, I want to take this moment. We've got 4 minutes left on the call, so here's what I want to do. It is 12:30 Pacific time and 8:30 in the UK, correct?
Yep, that's right.
I want to stop here and take 5 minutes, because we actually have people in the waiting room that couldn't get in because we're sold out. We had to keep people outside behind the stanchions. So we'll see what happens. But I want to take 5 minutes and then come back in 5 minutes using the exact same information. We'll all meet here and continue the conversation.
12:35.
Yeah. That sound good for everybody?
Uncharted territory. We'll find out.
All right. See everybody in a minute, guys.
Okay.
Hey, for those of you who are just coming into the room, and I think Chris might be one of them, we're actually taking a quick break. So we're going to come back in 5 minutes. You can use all the same information to dial in. For those of you who are, I think most of you got that message. But I'm going to end the meeting now. We'll be back here in 5 minutes. See you soon. Chuck, are you there?
Yes, sir. Coming to you loud and clear.
All right.
Live as I'll ever be.
Stevie, are you there? You might have to manually unmute your mic, Stevie.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
Great.
Thanks for coming back. We've got 100% of the room back in. So amazing. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for your patience. This is still, we're like Chuck said, we're in uncharted territory here. There have been some great questions about the book. So Stevie, I wanted to start this second part with you.
Sure.
Tom B asks, are there any musician biographies or autobiographies that helped form your ideas about what a musician biography should be?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Okay, so I would say probably my two favorite musicians' biographies are probably Peter Guralnick's Elvis, 2-volume Elvis biography, particularly the second one, Careless Love. And then Warren Zane's Tom Petty biography, which blew me away. I'm a huge Petty fan, have been for many years. And that one in particular, I think, I've been really lucky. Warren had a read of this book and he's given us an endorsement, which is just fantastic. Couldn't have asked for anything more, really. But Warren's writing, I think, has taught me a lot about kind of, so take a step back. So my background is I'm an academic, and I've written books, but I've never written a full-length book about music until now. And one of the things I think I learned from Warren was about actually just letting go and writing about what the music does to me. So allowing myself to kind of engage at that emotional level, maybe with the music and with the story. And I think Warren does that really well in his biography of Petty. And I have to say that when when Petty died, one of the kind of, what I always say about that is that it's the first time this has happened to me where somebody I'd never met died and it felt like I was grieving, actually felt like a grieving process. And actually reading Warren's book kind of helped me through that process somehow, rereading that biography. So there's something special about that book for me. So that would probably be the one I would hold up as, the model.
Kind of a follow-up question. One of the things that was on my mind was, Chuck's a great writer, and you would think that he might have some inclination. Well, we kind of know why he doesn't maybe now, but an inclination to write his own autobiography. Stevie, how did you feel writing about a writer?
It's a challenge because I say this in the book that actually nobody tells a story like Chuck Prophet does. So I think for me, from the very beginning, and I remember saying this very early on to Chuck when we were talking about whether it would happen at all, that I wanted his voice to come through the book. That to me was the first priority, because I can understand Chuck doesn't have time to write an autobiography, so I'm putting myself out there and saying, offering, seeing whether he would sign up to letting me write it. But what I've tried to do throughout the book is to make sure Chuck's voice is heard. And we've spent many hours sitting in that office space and talking, and there's a lot there that hasn't fit into the book. But what I hope is that I try and capture his tone and his warmth, his humor, his kind of odd way of looking at things, the constant surprises. And I think, I'm hoping that's going to come through. And I hope that those who read the book will feel like, at least from time to time, they're sitting in the room listening to Chuck talk.
Tell me, so there's also a special edition of the book. What was the What was the thinking behind that, about doing the special edition?
Yeah, I mean, that came from the publisher. So Jawbone Press, they specialize in music and biographies and autobiographies. And they don't do this for all their books, but they offer this thing where we can do a limited edition, hardback, slipcase, and they try and put some bonus content in there. And we had a few months back and forth about what seemed to be the right thing to do with that. And in the end, I hope that that the people who've invested in it will be pleased. I don't want to give too much away, but there's a really nice folder of photographic prints in there, and they're all by one particular photographer. And maybe Chuck can talk a little bit about Tom.
Yeah, well, I mean, when it came time to the pictures, I'm not an organized person. It's just not my gift. And to go back to the thing about writing, I want you guys to know that, I can get an anecdote or something onto the page, but, this is like Stevie's 7th or 8th book. He's an academic. If I see a semicolon or if I dare use one every once in a while, I'm completely in terror, whether I'm using it right. So I want to let everybody know Stevie is a published author. This is like, this is another book in a long line of books. I'm kind of a little bit more of a bullshit artist. Maybe if I did a book someday, it could be maybe like a series of essays that are like snapshots of a certain time. Loudon Wainwright did something like that last year, a book that so great I read it twice. Anyway, that's my feelings about that. And as for the photographs, I'm not a particularly organized person. It's not my gift. Stephanie Finch, not a particularly organized person. There was a shoebox here and a shoebox there. And I said, Stephanie, are you sure there aren't more photos around here? And she said, well, there might be a couple in here that I like, but I don't lose them. And I said, no. So we kind of turned over a box to Stevie and let him have his way with it. But right around that time, I heard from this guy, Tom Erickson's brother, John, I believe, or John Erickson.
John, yeah.
And he said, listen, my brother, his health has been failing. He's been suffering from MS, and I'm coming to San Francisco. I'm here in San Francisco to help my brother move to some assisted living in Maine. I found a box of photographs here. Would you like them? I said, well, okay. So I got a chance to go hang out with Tom. And Tom Erickson is this guy from, I remember Tom, I probably remember him from like 1988. He came here from Massachusetts. He was one of those guys that saw the San Francisco music scene with fresh eyes. He could see something that we couldn't see. He thought there was a scene. I just thought we were about a total of about between 50 and 75 losers, but he saw something. And so he was the guy. He was always around. He had a camera, and he was around so much you would forget that he had a camera. So when I saw some of these photographs, I thought, oh God, these are really, they're really real, and they capture a time. And so Stevie recognized that they were special. And so that's what the deluxe edition is. It's an additional half a dozen prints from Tom between 1988 and 1999 or something. So yeah, that's a little bit about Tom.
Well, just to say on that, there's so many great photos. I think there's about 60 in the book, so not the special edition, but the book itself, both versions. We've got, I think, 60 photos from throughout Chuck's career. And going through, and I spent, many hours going through literally thousands of photos. And Tom's really jumped out at me, and particularly his photos from about 1988, when Chuck was playing those, basement bars, playing the Albion and the Paradise upstairs and those kinds of venues. That was such a magical time, it seems to me. Chuck and I have talked a lot about that era. And so much of it is lost now because it was, the live performances. There are a couple of recordings, very few. But those magical moments as Chuck was reinventing himself in around 88, 89, Tom captured that. And there are some just incredible photos of Chuck.
Plus, we look really young. We look really young. And And yeah, when I saw those photos, I thought, well, these are, these are kind of amazing. And plus, you know, the further back you go, it's easier to romanticize things.
I got a question here from Kathy Hostetler for Stevie. What was your favorite Chuck Prophet album when you started the book? And did that change while writing it?
Oh, goodness. That's, yeah.
I think I'm going to mute you right here.
I think Chuck knows what I'm going to say.
How do I mute Stevie here?
Yeah, it's really hard. I guess for me, Homemade Blood remains. I always say, I think, you know, in terms of songwriting and all kinds of things, and vocals and everything, you know, Chuck has definitely, you know, exceeded what he achieved on Homemade Blood. As an album, Homemade Blood is the one I somebody asked me the other day, you know, if it was a desert island situation and I could just choose one album, I guess that would be the one. But I would mourn all the others that I had to leave behind. But I will say, and Chuck and I have talked about this, and I've puzzled a lot over this and talked about it with different people and musicians. And it seems to me that even the greatest artists, you know, the ones that I revere, Dylan, Springsteen, Petty, Neil Young, they all go through a purple patch. And it may be, you know, they might have a streak that lasts 8-10 years, and maybe there'll be a sudden revival, you know, 10 years later, an album that reaches back to that kind of level. But it feels to me that what happens with these geniuses is that the well runs dry. And one of the things that I do feel quite genuinely about Chuck is that well hasn't run dry yet. So, you know, Chuck is still writing songs and coming up with the melodies and the lyrics between him and Kurt and the songs he writes himself, that, you know, that he's still reaching higher and higher all the time. And, you know, if I'm really honest, every time a new one comes out, I'm a little bit nervous, you know, is it still going to reach that kind of standard? And it always does. And that stuns me every time. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there listening who feel the same.
Stevie, can you define a purple patch? Because I was confused by that term too.
Okay, purple patch. So so we think about Dylan in the 60s, when you look at, you know, Highway 61 and Blonde on Blonde, and that would be a purple patch. Or if you look at, you know, Springsteen, Born to Run, Darkness, The River, that kind of Born in the USA, Nebraska Born in the USA, that would be a purple patch where they're really hitting that kind of level of, you know, 5-star albums consistently. Highlight, bright spot, somebody's just jumped in.
Regis. So, yeah, that was a good clarification. Chuck, do you want to say anything? There were a lot of questions before the show about your guitar playing. You know, there was a question about a stolen guitar, but there was also questions about that you write left but play right. Is that?
That's true. I am left-handed. Yeah, I mean, I write with my left hand. But I really didn't even know they made left-handed guitars. I got a guitar that was passed down from my sister. It was different back then, you know.
Somebody had asked before, I think Kirk Biglione, Squier versus Fender.
Well, a Squier technically is a Fender, but it's a budget line that they created in the 80s. And when I joined Green on Red, I didn't own a guitar. That's another story, stupid story. But we signed to this company, Enigma Records, and we said, we're going to need some money because we need to buy some instruments. But back then they were like, you know, look at these guys. We can't give them money, you know. So they had an account at a music store, and I rode the bus. I mean, it was a chore. I rode a bus from North Hollywood all the way to Whittier, California, to a music store where they had an account. And there was nothing in there of any value. There was one Telecaster hanging on the wall, and it was a Squier, which was like a budget model, which they were selling them for like $150. And I said, I guess I'll just take that guitar, get back on the bus. and go back to Hollywood, you know. And then I ended up using that guitar for 1 gig, 2 gigs, a record. And then it started to become something that I attached an irrational power to, you know, like some people get a lucky pen or a certain kind of typewriter, or, you know, and so I just played that guitar. I still play it to this day. And it's too late to stop now. It knows all the songs.
It's hard to teach the guitar the new songs.
Yeah, you know, it's just I'm comfortable with it. It's an extension of, it's another limb.
Stevie, we had a couple questions. So can you tell us just briefly, you mentioned this is your first book about strictly about music. What do you teach? What's your day job?
Yeah, so I teach drama and film at the University of Winchester here in the UK. And yeah, I mean, I started off, my PhD was in poetry. And then I got interested in directing plays, and I kind of moved into drama. I got a job as a drama lecturer, got a bit bored with that, moved into film. I mean, Chuck and I bonded as much over film as we have over music. I think we have endless conversations about that. So, but yeah, I mean, I've done a little bit of, I've written a few book chapters and that kind of thing about music, but this was the first time that I've written a whole book about music. So it's kind of a new direction for me, and the university kind of trusted me. They helped fund my trips out to San Francisco, and it seems to have worked, I hope.
Chuck, having gone through this process with Stevie, would you be more or less inclined to write a memoir or an autobiography?
No, I'm not really interested in writing an autobiography. But I like to write, you know. And so who knows? We'll leave the door open. I mean, look, making these records every 18 months and doing what I do, I mean, it's kind of why I recently answered a question with my label. They said, why are you not streaming concerts? And I'm like, man, I'm just trying to do what I'm good at. You know, so I don't know that I'll be writing an autobiography or a long form book any day soon. I'll write one on Stevie.
So this is a kind of a cool, this is like sort of a very book talk kind of question to ask, and I like it. Regis, for Stevie, could you pick a paragraph of your favorite passage? And while you're thinking about that, maybe you already have that prepared.
No.
While you're thinking for a minute to read a paragraph from the book, Chuck, yeah.
Okay. You want me to read a paragraph from the book?
Yeah, why not?
Jeez, I don't have a copy of it.
Well, tell us something from the Green on Red days that was maybe that was particularly surprising for you to learn.
Okay. Well, I can tell you a Dan Stewart story. How would that be? Yeah. Yeah, Dan, I met him for the first time. He was doing a UK tour. I'd seen him before, but you know, on stage, I'd never met him before. And so he was in Cambridge. That was the closest he was going to get to me. So I took a train to Cambridge, and you know, we all have those Dans. So we all know about Dan's reputation, and so I was a little bit nervous about meeting him for the first time. And I remember I found my way to the apartment where he was staying, and I knocked on the door. I was standing outside the door before I even knocked. I could hear this yelling from inside, this ferocious voice ranting about something or other. And I thought, oh my God. And so I knocked on the door. Tom Heyman, his guitarist, opened the door. Tom worked with Chuck as well for many years. Tom just kind of, I introduced myself. Tom was expecting me, and he said something like, welcome to the madhouse, or something. Like, I could just hear Dan ranting from the kitchen. So I kind of made my way in, and he was having some complaint about, he'd got a parking ticket or a series of parking tickets, and was furiously typing emails to his manager, I think, and just bawling everybody out. And then he turned to me and said, I'll be within a minute, Stevie. Like, really nice, quiet, gentle, and then he just started ranting again. So that was this was me, my one interview with Dan, and just wondering how it was going to go from there. But I will say Dan was a real gentleman. He was great. He calmed down. We went and got some lunch together, and we talked all afternoon. And he was, he's fantastic. Great stories. So much love and respect for Chuck came through as well. And Dan was great. Dan looked at versions of the chapters about Green on Red. There are 3 chapters about the band, and gave me great feedback. And then, it was a really healthy part of the process, I think.
Hey guys, we got about 5 minutes left, and I want to try something unexpected. I want to unmute somebody who has a question that they want to ask Chuck and Stevie personally. So if you would raise your hand, and I don't know if you can see how to do that. There's like a feature in Zoom where you can raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, I will unmute you. Let's see, who is raising? And actually not raise your hand on camera, but actually raise your hand in Zoom. Although if you raise your hand on camera, that would be helpful. Anybody? Am I missing it? Oh, I got one right here. Okay. All right, Alex, if you unmute your mic, you should be able to speak.
Yes. Hi. Here's Alex from Athens in Greece.
My friend.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Chuck. Hi, guys.
Hi.
How are you? Chuck, the last time I was in your concert was in Athens, 89 with Green on Red. And I keep asking Stevie what happened in Athens back then. I read, but I don't have a clue.
Well, I think it was 1987.
87, perhaps, yes.
Yes, and it was about the second or third to last gig of a really long, grueling tour behind an album called The Killer Inside Me. The Killer Inside Me was not particularly well received. It was kind of a just bombastic record. I mean, artistically, there's a lot to recommend about it, but a little bit of the magic was gone. I mean, the crowds had kind of adjusted, as the crowds will. What was once a full Paradiso was a half full Paradiso. And we were starting to, as a band, get pretty dispirited. And it had been a long run, between 84 and 87. We really hadn't had a break. And by the time we got to Athens, something happened, or one thing or another happened, and Danny dove into the crowd for some reason or another, and I could hear his guitar, but I couldn't see him. I was standing on the lip of the stage looking for Dan, and then eventually I just kind of saw the cable that the lead that connects to his guitar, and I pulled him like a fish out of there, And when he finally got back up on stage, the guitar, the neck had snapped off. And that was Dan's Gretsch guitar. He probably never owned anything that nice. He's probably never owned anything that nice since then. I can guarantee it. So the magic was gone. And then our manager came out, our British manager came out to visit us. We had a couple days off, and I don't know how this I'm not really sure how this happened, but the pre-sales for our final London show at the Astoria, pretty big venue, the pre-sales were not very encouraging. They were pretty soft. And so somebody hatched this idea, like, well, what if we took Dan to a doctor, and the doctor said this man's in the middle of a nervous breakdown? I said, well, yeah, you could get the insurance, and then we could keep the deposit, and the promoter can cancel the gig, and it's kind of like an act of God thing. That could work, and so we did it. I don't know if we voted on it. I never felt good about it, I got to tell you that. But we did it, and that was the last time Green on Red ever played, was that gig in Athens. I mean, Danny and I resuscitated the band, probably 6 months later, which in 80 years that was like a long time, you know. But yeah, that's what happened. And we never played again except for in 2006 when we finally had a reunion in Tucson. We talked about doing more gigs, and I said, look, I wouldn't really feel great about moving forward if we didn't make up that Astoria gig. And we did. We played the Astoria, probably more people that time around than there would have been anyway. And the Astoria has since been torn down. So I don't know. It's just kind of a nice way of honoring that.
Well, I'm gonna put it back on you, Chuck and Stevie. We're right at time, but if you guys want to do one last question from the audience, we can do that.
Sure. One last question for Stevie.
I'm gonna because that worked pretty well last time. I'm gonna look for a hand raised. Neil P, you jumped out at me, so you should be.
Hey, Neil.
Hi guys, nice to see you.
Hi, Neil.
Thanks
Hello,
for doing
Neil. I know you.
Hi Chuck, you well? You've managed to get through the entire discussion without mentioning the Mission Express, which seems very remiss of you. So I just thought, Chuck, you might want to tell us what it's like playing with those guys.
Well, I started touring like in England, maybe 1993 or so, and Stephanie has always been a constant, and it was always there was always drama. I mean, it seemed like it seemed like especially the drummer seat was a revolving door, and as soon as you rest your eyes, you know, that drummer's gone, and we could never really get that confidence that comes with having the same lineup, you know. So now that we've got James DePreto and Kevin T. White, and then the addition of Vicente Rodriguez 4 or 5 years ago, I'm sorry, nobody can touch us. You know, it's just been the best lineup, and I mean, they're really intuitive. We all grew up listening to the same music, and it's just a wonderful, you know, soulful, considerate group of guys. Not that we don't have our issues, but yeah, I'm really grateful for the Mission Express, and I'm really grateful that we've been able to keep this lineup going, and you know, we've been able to sustain it, because there's always been, you know, financial insecurity and stops and starts, and we really have been on somewhat of a roll. So that's makes this pause button that we're in right now all that much harder, you know. Thank you.
Hey, I'm gonna so that's it. But before everybody goes, I want to unmute everyone. So everyone is unmuted now.
On to Bristol, please, again.
Bristol's a guitar town, and if there's some promoters in there, I know I haven't always been the softest, cuddliest, but I swear, you know, I'm game for anything at this point.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's been a blast. Hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank you.
Come
to England soon.
Thank you, Dan.
Love you, Sherry. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Give Steffi a big hug, big kiss.
You got it. I'll try to get her to take some interest in this. Wish me luck.
You too.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Adios.
Adios.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.
Thanks again, Chuck.
Yeah. Good interview.
3,
We love you.
1. There he is over there. There. Let's wait.